dear friends, even though I spoke many times at the General Assembly of the United Nations, I must admit that I never met so many men and women with so much commitment, courage to freedom and to human rights. Two of them very prominently sit in front of us, Mr. Lech Walesa and the former Prime Minister of Romania, which are examples of the group. I feel not only honored, I feel inspired, I share your hopes, and I am extremely grateful for having invited me to this forum, which is, I would say, a magnificent way to embrace humanity. So, someone who probably knows diplomats well said that a diplomat thinks twice before saying nothing. I'm going to try not to dispel that because I think it's a very well-founded opinion, but I will try to say a few things regarding the topic today. I thought that a good way to bring the background of the Milosevic case would be to take you on a little tour behind the closed doors of the informal consultations room of the Security Council, where probably very few of you have attended. This is not the big room that you see in CNN and the horseshoe form. This is a room very small, where only the 15 members of the Security Council sit. And I would say it's not, diplomatic language is not used. Sometimes I have compared it to a boxing ring because that's the real Security Council discussion takes place there. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a book which you have not read because I have not finished writing it, which I call A Room Without a View. And I say a room without a view because that room at the United Nations, even though it has a large window that overlooks the East River, its curtains are always drawn. It's like the people in the room do not really want to have a view. I will be talking about probably the most televised, photographed tragedy that took place in the 20th century. And it was so close, in the middle of Europe, it was not in Africa. And it took such a long time to be acknowledged. This is a room where you can say anything if you are a member. I used to represent my country when Venezuela was a democratic country. If Venezuela would be today in Security Council, it would be in favor of precisely of the opposite what I'm going to tell you. In that room, whatever you say, there are no records. You cannot be accounted for. And that explains why so many resolutions are taken at the United Nations without anyone assuming the blame, neither the responsibility. Yesterday, I was watching, I have forgotten that I have to be, I was watching some of the pictures, the photograph, and I understood why the Security Council does not sometimes grasp well the topics that are brought to the table. You receive in the Security Council, in white paper, clean resolutions, for example, telling you yesterday at the market of Sarajevo, 15 children were killed by a bomb coming out from the Serb side. You know, it's white, doesn't have any blood, you don't hear the cries, the tears, and it is completely immaculate. If the Security Council would have videos like we saw here yesterday, or like I've seen in Rwanda afterwards, probably the reaction might be more difficult to resist. I call my topic today the greatest cover in the United Nations history because it is. And who were the participants and the main actors? The 5 most important countries. And among them, who were the most important culprits? I don't know whether the order will be correct, but very close would be a tie between the United Kingdom and France and Russia, and then followed by the United States and China at the end as in a way, as a complicity because of the Tibetan issue, didn't want to get involved in the case of Yugoslavia. The bringing to Milosevic to trial was a long process. There is no instant gratification in international justice, as we have seen. But I'm going to tell you a personal anecdote. Ms. Del Ponte was the prosecutor of the tribunal, called me one day in New York and said if I would like to be a witness against Mr. Milosevic. And I said, why me? Why not the permanent members? because they say they could have never anticipated that a massacre would take place in Srebrenica. And I said, well, they're all lying. And she said, well, that's what I suspect. So I went, prepared for about 3 months with the lawyers at the court. And I remember arriving at The Hague in the afternoon, and I asked where the tribunal was. I had been one of the creators of the tribunal while I was in the Security Council. And I went to the building, I looked at the building, and I said, my God, when we created that 10 years ago, people thought that nothing would ever happen with a tribunal. And tomorrow, I'm going to be a witness against a man who is 2 blocks away from this building, and I'm going to be one of his accusers after having tried to bring him to reason years back. I have asked myself very often some questions. Would Mr. Milosevic would have been condemned by the tribunal for crimes against humanity and genocide? Was Milosevic's death the end of the process that would bring justice to the Bosnians? Is there a new standard today that would send a message to dictators and criminals that the southern part of France is not a place to retire anymore? How did this tragedy start? The tragedy started in Dubrovnik. When the Serbs attacked Dubrovnik, I think it was October 1991. What did Europe did? The former minister of Luxembourg, Mr. Poux, said, this is the hour of Europe. It was not. Europe was not up to that responsibility and failed miserably, and must assume the responsibility for what happened for the years afterwards. And the European countries, mainly the United Kingdom, France, and Russia, extended this process thinking that the Serbs were going to take over Bosnia. And why would they allow genocide and massacres to take place in the middle of Europe? It's a question that one has to ask oneself. Why such an ecumenical country like the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina was suddenly transformed by the European countries into a Muslim country in the middle of Europe, when it used to be so ecumenical? What did the United States, major superpower, said and did? Well, Secretary Baker during the Bush administration said, we don't have a dog in that fight. What did Warren Christopher during Clinton said? It is not in our national interest. By that time, they had killed 150,000 Bosnians and had raped more than 20,000 women. I doubt that Mr. Milosevic would have ever been condemned finally on crimes against humanity. I was 2 days a witness against him. I remember coming into the tribunal. The judge is there, he's in front. We nodded to each other like saying, well, I told you, you said, because we have been negotiating the years before. And why would not have been condemned? Because I think he would have shared too much and too many information regarding the knowledge that the main countries in the Security Council knew about the crimes that were being committed against humanity, and they did not share it with the rest of us. And according to the Genocide Convention, they were forced to intervene, which they did not. When I was a witness against Milosevic, and then I was also a witness for the Muslim commander Oric, who was the one who defended Srebrenica, the prosecutor showed me a memorandum, and he said, have you seen this? It was a letter from Madame Ogata, who was the lady in charge of the, I don't know why I left it, the lady in charge of the humanitarian program of the United Nations. And the memo said to the following to Boutros Ghali, Mr. Secretary General, I urge you to proceed immediately to advise the members of the Security Council there's an imminent tragedy going to occur in Srebrenica and Tuzla. What is Secretary General? I saw that for the first time almost 11 years after he had been written it, and I saw it at the tribunal. Mr. Boutros Ghali never shared with us, at least not with the non-permanent members. To complete this view very rapidly, back to the past, I have to think that in 1991, I entered the United Nations. Iraq invaded Kuwait. In 6 months, a coalition like the world have never seen of more than 60 countries put together 500,000 soldiers, fully armed, and sent them all over the world, tanks, planes. Were they more interested in the Kuwaitis, or were they more interested in preserving that the oil would not fall into the hands of Mr. Saddam Hussein? The oil actually motivated and energized this alliance. Bosnia started for 5 years and could never get any attention, even though, like I said, 200,000 people had died and 20,000 have been raped. But in Bosnia, there was no oil to be safe. And not only that, the major countries did not allow the Bosnians to arm themselves, which according to the Charter of the United Nations, Article 51, you have the right to defend yourself. It was not allowed. We imposed an embargo. I thought when we approved the resolution, embargo looks like a moral thing to do, an arms embargo. The major countries knew, we didn't know, that the only part of Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia, that was fully armed was the Serbian part, and that the Muslim part of the Bosnia and Herzegovina were not. So in a way, when we passed that resolution, we were sealing the fate of those people, which actually happened. Are there any lessons learned into this? Yes. One of the lessons is that if you don't have oil, it's not of a national interest. That if you don't arm yourself, you might be the subject of an embargo. So actually, it's like an encouragement to be armed. Apartheid, which was the greatest achievement of the United Nations in South Africa, was transported to Bosnia and Herzegovina. The United Nations divided in 3 ethnic, religious components a country that we had just admitted 3 months before as a member of the United Nations. I would like to leave a thought with you. Could the international community could have stopped Milosevic? Absolutely. In that time, the United States was just coming from winning the Gulf War I. It looked like the Roman Empire, able to do anything in the world. They didn't. And something which to me is the most worrying that I would like to share with you. I believe that the origin of terrorism in the western part of the world took roots in Bosnia. Why? Because at this time, we were in 1992 and 1993 punishing 2 Muslim countries, rightly so. Iraq for invading Kuwait and Libya for acts of terrorism. But while that was happening, a 3rd Muslim country was being violated, raped, which was Bosnia, and no one took a look at them. The resentment, the message sent to the Muslim world was that no one would care in the West for the Muslim part. And I believe that is having, and it will have tremendous consequences. As one of the persons who promoted the tribunal, I believe that we have advanced, no doubt about that. Taylor is in jail. Karadzic is going to be tried. I'm going to be a witness against Karadzic in September. Milosevic found his maker before we found him. And Mr. al-Bashir is being indicted. And to conclude, I'd like to share with you an emotional load I carry with me since 1993. I headed the mission, the United Nations Security Council mission to the ground to Srebrenica during the war, which was the first mission the United Nations ever sent. And I went with ambassadors of Russia, France, Hungary, New Zealand, and Pakistan. And when we landed, I realized a few days later, in the minutes, that the reason there were no missions of the United Nations to the ground, to the terrain, was because we would discover the truth. We had been lied for a long time. We were told that Srebrenica was under siege. No. When we got there, we saw that it had been capitulated and enforced the capitulation by the United Nations UNPROFOR forces. I gathered the people at the town with the mayor in the school, and I had all the other ambassadors with me. There were about 500 people, and I said to the mayor and the people, we are here, 7 ambassadors from the United Nations Security Council, the most important political body in the world, and we came to tell you that we will protect you. In my report when we came back to New York, I said to the Security Council, and I said it to the media, we have about 50 journalists with us, international. I said, a slow-motion genocide is taking place in Srebrenica. And it's like an open jail, and the United Nations soldiers are acting like the capos in the concentration camp. 10 years later, I came back for the anniversary of Srebrenica, and I found the mayor. I felt so bad. We embraced each other. We cried. And I said to him, you know, the only thing I can tell you are my last words that I said when I left the Security Council, quoting Shakespeare's Henry V, who said, shame, nothing but shame, eternal shame, on those government leaders that did not live up to the responsibilities that they were supposed to hold. I'm sorry for the pictures. I was not able to coordinate them so well. Thank you so very much.